Hello, we are here in my crafting corner, so obviously we have some sewing to get started on. We are pivoting and doing something a little different for this channel and doing a cosplay. This still is within my vintage realm. You'll see in a second using the pattern, but I am going to cosplay from the new Frankenstein Elizabeth nightgown. I thought this gown was super elegant and also super approachable from a sewing perspective. This is basically a 1960s style nightgown, which is well within my realm of vintage sewing. I loved the classicness of this, and also this was a type of sensuality that really speaks to me with that kind of sheer and yet kind of modest. It's just a more nuanced sensuality than a lot of the sensuality that I feel we see in films. So I really loved that. I'm going to start out by introducing you guys to the pattern I'm going to use. I'm going to use this pattern Pacifica 3000. This is also a brand I'm not very familiar with, so that will also make this interesting. The pattern is not exactly what I need. It's pretty darn close, but it's not exactly. So I'm going to be making a bunch of alterations. I'm going to be adding some gathering, changing the sleeve, as well as changing the neckline a little bit. And then of course I'll be adding ruffling. And then for the fabrics, let me show you. I will be using layering to get the sheerness and the color that I want. So for my lining layers, I have this poly chiffon. It is quite heavy weight, but still rather sheer. Right now I'm thinking I will likely be doubling it up. So yes, I'm going to use this light blue as the lining. This color is not quite right, but I think with this as the outer lining, oh goodness, wow, this is not filming well at all. I need to block the light from it. But this outer lining is a little bit more, has that green color to it. So my plan is for this to overall be the color of the piece, because this I will use the most gathering with. I will also be doing all of the trimming with this. The sleeves, this will be the predominant fabric. I love the nude illusion of this dress from the movie, so I want to make sure I'm staying true to that. I'll also probably be wearing 6 pairs of nude tights under it. Yeah, I'm going to just take you through the constructing of this. I'm hoping it will just take the weekend. I actually have a 3-day weekend this weekend, and unfortunately I came down with COVID earlier this week, which means I am in quarantine for the whole 3-day weekend, so I have nothing better to do but sit here and sew. So I think it's a good time to give all of this a try. Basically, what I'm going to first do with you guys is, I guess I'm going to cut out the pattern, and then I'm going to show you all the modifications I'm going to make to the pattern to make it a little bit closer to what the screen looks like. It's actually pretty, like I said, pretty darn close. The lines are really close. I'm just going to be finessing some things with some gathering. So I'll take you through kind of the redrafting of this fabric, and then I'm going to do a mock-up, which is going to be kind of annoying because I don't have a good light fabric to do a mock-up out of. So unfortunately, I'm going to be doing a mock-up out of cotton just to check fit. I can't really check drapeage, but I can make sure everything looks the way it should look. And then from there, we're going to take it into actually sewing the whole thing. So we'll see if I can do it in 3 days. I would love to, because that leaves me with a lot less Comic-Con crunching than I expected to do, because I had planned on having a more busy and out and about weekend. But now that I have, 3 days where I truly have nothing better to do, I think I'll be able to get it done. And luckily my COVID has been pretty mild. My worst day was 3 days ago, and I'm feeling pretty okay. I just am a bit sniffly. So yes, that is the plan. I am excited for this. I have been thinking about this dress ever since I saw this movie. We are gonna hop to it, and gonna be hopefully an exciting and not pain in the butt project, but we'll see how that goes. So let's go hop to it. I started by opening up this pattern and was quite surprised by a few different things I found. One, this included the pattern for a doll to wear the same thing as you, which I thought was quite fun. And the other is these were only printed on smaller sheets, so I'm gonna have to pin the skirt pieces together. This is also printed on normal paper, which was interesting. I would just compare this to an indie pattern of today, where they don't have the money to invest usually in all of that tissue paper printing, so you're more likely to see things like this. But just definitely a fascinating experience, as this is a vintage pattern brand I've never used before. And now it's time to do a bit of pattern hacking. First, starting with the sleeve, which I feel more confident in. I'm starting by just doing a basic tracing of the pattern, because I will alter this from that to, of course, not damage the original pattern, since it is 50 years old at this point. And I'm starting by first putting in a bicep adjustment. I'm doing this because I know that 70s patterns tend to run really, really tiny in the shoulders. I'm going to want more room, and also if you look at the actual dress that she wears in the movie, there is definitely room in the bicep. These are not skin tight sleeves, and I want to make sure that these aren't skin tight as a result. And once I have the bicep as full as I want, I'm just going to trace off this pattern yet again and iterate off of this guy. I then cut this pattern on the lengthen and shorten line, and here I'm just tracing the top piece of the pattern. And then I'm essentially using like a slash and spread method to make this kind of like belled out pattern. I did this kind of chaotically. You should definitely do this less chaotically to get a more precise shape where you measure where you're drawing each line, you check your angles, and then you make sure as you spread it, you're spreading it evenly with the same number of inches in each. But I just did this kind of on vibes. And then I'm going to trace off this as well, but I'm going to make sure I am adding in that 5/8 inch seam allowance on the top so that way I can sew it to the other pattern piece. I added 5/8 inch seam allowance on the top pattern that I already traced off. And here we will then take a look at the bodice. I need the bodice to have more gathering in it, so I am doing that. And I also decided to drop the bodice quite a bit lower because typically 1970s patterns don't fit me well in the bust. So I'm starting to drop it by 2 inches just to give myself room because I am quite full busted. I first attempted to add fullness by doing a slash and spread, having no idea what I was doing. Don't recommend this. Gave up, started over. I realized I had just been kind of silly because it was pretty easy to add fullness by just cheating the angles on both the front of the bodice where I just want a little bit more gathering, and then the back where I want a lot more gathering on the side, because if you look again at the costume photographs or the actual movie itself, you can see that most of the gathering actually sits under the armpit. And then here I'm about to feel very confident because I'm going to do this following, I've watched The Closet Historian do this a million times, so I feel ready to move the fullness that is in the shoulder dart down into the bust dart, and very excited at the fact that I know how to do this from memory from, again, watching The Closet Historian so much. And then I'm going to trace that off because this is going to be the way my lining works. I don't want my lining to have additional darts that the outer layers will not have. And then I'm adding those same angles here, but not measured because, again, we're feeling a bit chaotic, and also there's not supposed to be quite as much volume here in the back. And with all of my pattern adjustments made, I'm going to real quick cut everything out. I will note I'm adding some extra inches as well to the skirt portion, so that way it can also be a little bit gathered like you see in the dress. I'm just doing that by literally just adding it because it's straight lines. I don't need to draft it. And you can also tell I'm just like cutting off the skirt randomly here because I don't need a full length skirt to know if this fits. I'm really looking for the bust and sleeve fit. So I'm also only going to be cutting one sleeve, and I'm going to sew all of this off camera and then check back in. All right, guys, I am here. I have my mock-up. This is all turning out exactly the way I want. I'm trying to remember that this is a much stiffer fabric, so it will get better. However, I will say the extra 1.5 inches that I added was quite excessive, so I'm actually going to pull that back up 1 inch to get this a little bit closer to under my bust to sit exactly the way I would like it to. That's like my first adjustment. My second adjustment is I'm going to pull the extra 1/2 inch that I added in the back out on the side here. Otherwise, I think the fit on the back is exactly what I want. It's flowy enough. And then I'm just going to add like an extra maybe inch, 1.5 inches into here to really get those drapes the way that she has them in the movie. And then I think this sleeve needs about not quite double, but a good amount more flow here and maybe a sharper angle. Actually, more flow here would equal a sharper angle. So I think that is all I'm going to do. So I only need to adjust actually this piece and this piece, and then I will be good to go. And then skirt wise, I'm going to actually add probably an additional 2 inches of gathering into the skirt. But yes, I feel like everything is working out actually quite well. This is actually even to me the perfect length once I double turn hem it. I can really see my vision coming together for this. So I'm feeling quite pleased. This is always like kind of a learning curve for me. So when it works out well, no, I'm not going to touch the back. I think it drapes nicely. I think once it's sheer and whatever, it will look right. So no, I'm not going to touch it. I'm just going to touch this piece and this piece. And yeah, I'm really proud of myself. I feel like I'm learning so much through doing projects like this, and it's good stuff. And yeah, I can't wait. So yes, I'm going to show you those final adjustments that I make, and then I'm just going to go straight to cutting it out. I feel pretty confident in this pattern. So here I definitely that I need to take off quite a bit. So I am doing that right here, following that lining pattern piece that I made to get kind of close to where that sits. It's kind of wild that I needed less in the bust here because this is just not typical for me at all. And I also added some additional side volume because I didn't feel like I had enough gathers there. So again, I'm just cheating that angle continuing that trend. And then for the sleeves, I feel like I need quite a bit more volume. So we're going to take up my entire table to do this. And again, we're just slashing and spreading, trying to get even more of an extreme bell shape. I did feel good enough about my mock-up that I'm just going to go straight into cutting on real fabric. Here I have the chiffon that I bought sitting here. This is the lining layer. Well, this is like the inner outer layer. I'm going to have an additional chiffon layer in here. And I'm just cutting this out following all the different methods and tricks I used for the mock-up. And I did actually add a little bit more gathering to the skirt as well. So I'm doing 3 inches on one side and then adding an additional 2 inches on the other side. So pretty easy. And I fear I might not have enough of this fabric. So right now I'm just cutting out the lining pieces for the bodice, and I'm going to sew this whole thing up and see if I feel good about that or if I think I need another layer of lining for the bottom as well, in which case we'll be delaying this project because I have to order it. And here I'm just repeating all of the sewing of the outer pieces right here. And I'm following again, adding the additional bit of gathering to the bottom part and all of that good stuff. Here I'm going to start by sewing up the side seams of the skirt because these are just nice long seams that are just easy to get going. And then I'm going to be using my serger to actually finish the edges. Chiffon is really, really finicky stuff, but I also don't feel like I need the French seam like refinedness on this. So I just feel like the serger is the perfect touch. For something like a cosplay, I don't feel like going through French seams. For me, French seams are for something I'm going to wash a lot. And now I'm turning my attention to the bodice. I'm first just starting by sewing all of the top shoulder seams together. So what I'm doing is I'm doing right sides of the nylon tricot together, and then I'm layering the chiffon behind it because I want the chiffon to be the inner layer, but I want them all sewn together. So I'm sewing all of these seams at the same time instead of doing like a flatlining thing that I just find not very successful for me. So we're going to try it this way and see how it goes. And once those are sewn, I am definitely happy with them, so I'm also running it through my serger before pressing it to the back side. I always press my seams to the back. And then here, I'm real quick basting both the neckline and the armholes with the 2 layers together just to make sure when I get further in the sewing process, they will act as one layer. These don't need any gathering or easing or anything like that. So this is truly just sticking them together. So again, they act like one piece of fabric instead of 2. And with my assistant clearly watching from above, I'm now going to run in all the gather stitches that are on the bodice. So I'm running 2 rows. I prefer to run 2 rows of gather stitches to then when I actually gather them, keep them nice and stacked and not have them do any weird angling. This is just personal preference. Whatever works for you works for you. And of course, Spooky continues to help by flopping on my ironing board when I need it. Here, I'm just kind of moving out the ease, although I got a bite for that apparently. But once she's out of my way, I'm going to start gathering in earnest. With the mock-up, I can really tell that the gathers kind of like broke apart and made the piece overall looser, and that's not the look that I'm going for here. So I'm going to be pretty particular about how I gather this, and I tested this trick in my mock-up to make sure it was going to work the way I thought, because usually in vintage, when I've double gathered something where you have a gathered top and a gathered bottom, to decide size, they have you cut a piece of hem binding to kind of sew the first layer too, and then do like on the wrong side and then sew of course right sides together so that tape just stays on the inside of the dress. I thought that was a really ugly method of doing this, so I'm testing the idea of using the paper I use to draft my patterns on in the middle instead, that has the measurements, having all the markings on that piece of paper, which is also just a lot easier than trying to remember the markings on the piece of hem tape. And I'm just going to pin directly to that piece of paper and sew through it, which you're going to see how that works. But I found this method to be quite successful to again have the gathered top and gathered bottom stay together and then also not like expand weirdly like when you sew gathered pieces of fabric together normally. So yeah, first I'm just going to gather down the top and then I'll flip it. I'll have paper side back up and I will gather down the skirt as well. The so far biggest con with this method is it's a lot harder to match your side seams perfectly, which does bother me a little bit, but we're going to live with it. But after I feel good about the spacing with the gathers, I am just going to sew it, like I said, with paper and all. I'm actually going to take my stitch length down this time. I took it down to a 2mm stitch instead of a 2.5 or 3. Again, I'm just trying to reduce the amount that this stretches out at the waist from the gathers like loosening together. This will also perforate the paper better, so it'll be easier to rip out later. But otherwise, I'm just sewing this with a normal seam allowance, normal everything. And everything's looking really good, but just to make sure for sure I feel great about it, I'm actually first going to take out all those gathering stitches that I put in. You don't necessarily have to do this, but I think a garment garment looks a lot better if it has no additional, like, essentially guidance stitching in it. So I like to seam rip all of the gathering stitches out, and it's really quite easy because you just have to pull basically one thread through on one side and then the other side will just come right out. Like, you don't have to seam rip this the same way you would a non-gathering stitch. And then I'm just ripping the paper out via the like dotted perforated line I made with the needle, and I'm making sure to pull all the like little tiny pieces out because I really don't want that in my finished garment. But yeah, this trick works rather well, and in my opinion better than the hem tape trick that I learned from doing a vintage pattern. And then I'm running the waistline through my serger again to cut off all that excess, especially because there's so much excess gathered fabric hanging out in here that could really add some unpleasant bulk to the waist. But I have to say, I'm very pleased with myself. And the very last thing that I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to top stitch this seam allowance up because that's the direction I would like it to face. I know this is all going to get covered with trim later, so I'm not worried about this additional top stitch, especially given the fact it'll give me the peace of mind that my seams aren't doing wonky things in the dress. That is going to make it lay weird. And now it is time for me to add the zipper, which I'm quite nervous about given this is very delicate and fine fabric. So I'm bringing out one of my old trusty tricks that I used when I first was learning to sew zippers, and I'm pulling out a stabilizer for the zipper and I'm going to melt that into the seams. This is basically just an interfacing. It's like a 1/4 inch wide that I used when I was learning to put in zippers because it was just helpful to have that added stiffness. And you can always do a wonder tape that washes out, but I actually like a little bit more oomph to my zipper because I feel like it helps with puckering and it helps with just like kind of weird stuff that zippers can do in a really fine fabric like this. And I think it actually can use the long-term stability, so I don't want this to melt away like a wonder tape. I'm just putting it in the same way you would interface, except for I'm sandwiching it in between where I did the basting for where my zipper will be. And then I'm just putting in my zipper like normal, going all the way around. Although this one, I will say, a lot of times I do a one-sided placket. This one I'm doing a double placket because I think with the fine fabric that just works better than a like one-sided flat placket. I find that a one-sided placket with a fine fabric tends to really like fly open and do some funky things. And while hopefully my hair will be covering the zipper in the back, or I guess my wig, let's be real, not real hair, I want to make sure that I am still having the craftsmanship level that I want in this garment. It is important to me that just because this is a costume doesn't mean it's poorly made. And that's just like a me thing. I totally think it's cool if you like to kind of like really quickly get a costume done. I just don't like that. I'm a kind of weird person. So I want to be clear that that was not a judgmental statement. It's just the way that I prefer to do things. With the main body of the dress done, I'm now turning my attention towards the sleeves. So I've sewn the side seams of the sleeves together, both the bell part as well as the like main sleeve part, and again finishing this via serger. And I've already attached these two pieces together with my machine to make sure I didn't get any weird ripples, because that can happen when you have like a very circular piece going onto a more cylindrical piece. But now I'm just finishing that with a serger, and then I'm going to top stitch this the same way I did the waistline, because again there's going to be trim covering the seam and it'll make sure my seam doesn't flap or do anything weird or cause sensory problems for me. And I went back and forth on if I was even going to finish the seam of the sleeve, but I can clearly see in the pictures I'm looking at that her sleeve is finished with a double turn hem. So I will attempt to double turn hem this evil stuff. However, I'm not great. Like, I talk about being kind of a perfectionist and wanting things to be really neat. I will say for a double turn hem, it's going to be a little uneven if I'm doing it because I just can't be bothered for something like that. For me, when I talk about making sure all my seams sit the right way and everything, a lot of times it's just a sensory thing. And now I am turning my focus to the bottom ruffle, which I haven't quite yet figured out. I determined I wanted it to be about 11 inches long just to get the ratio right. I didn't Google it, but I imagine Mia Goth is taller than me because honestly most actresses are taller than me. So I'm just kind of eyeballing the ratio and going off vibe. And I don't know why I do this to myself, but again, I couldn't leave the bottom edge unfinished. It would bother me. So instead I am double turn hemming the whole, I think this is a 204 inches around. So yes, I spent a lot of time on this, but I'm going to show you how I do a double turn hem and have it turn out the best. There's a bunch of tools and different things you can use for this to work. I know there's a lot of people who have feet that will do it and they love it. I do not love the finish I get from a foot because I do not have like the finger control I feel like that a machine takes for this. So I do it the slow way, which is going to be extra terrible on these 204 inches. So after sewing that bottom hem, I am now going around and I'm going to trim off the little extra that I get from a double turn hem. I usually leave like a quarter here because I just have a better time having control here, so I have to cut that quarter off. And here you can see this is actually the chiffon. I've moved on from the nylon because I decided to show you guys on something that wasn't quite as painful to do. So we are no longer cutting with tiny scissors 204 inches, although I have done that. Clearly. I am using like an applique scissors that has a little bit of curve, so you're less likely to accidentally catch the fabric below. And then once I get that bit off, I actually go and I iron this just flat. I don't do an iron of the double turn hem yet, and then I'm just manually putting in the double turn and sewing that down. And I'll press it again at the very end just to like get it all crisp and looking nice. But yes, the inner skirt, much better than the outer skirt with the ruffle. That was a terrible experience. And here I am again running gathering stitches around all 204 inches. Here you see me using this bright orange and bright red thread. I was actually using contrast thread in the other ones, and this is to make it easier to unpick and pull out all of my gathering stitches later. And I actually typically do use matching thread when I do this, but I was very limited on the amount of matching thread I had on this project. And with Joann's gone, there was nowhere I could run out and get it with me having COVID. So I had to make do with what I had thread-wise, which meant we were pulling all sorts of things from the archive. And here I am sewing those two things together, the ruffle and the bottom of the skirt. I did not make you witness all of the evening of gathering I had to do to make this work. Honestly, I feel like I'm kind of like faux complaining because secretly I love gathering and it's one of my favorite things to do, which is one of the reasons this dress appealed to me so much, is I would rather gather for hours than like make a really, really fitted bodice. So here we are. And now I consider the base of the dress really like done, and now it's just needing its decoration. I do have to do the lining, but that's going to be a later thing. But for the decoration, I decided to use 2.5 inch cut strips, which I will then ruffle in the middle. You're going to see how all of that works in a second. But first I had to cut like yards and yards and yards and yards of this. So I was cutting for a while, and I ended up cutting 12 of these, which is a grand total of 1,224 inches long of ruffles. And with 1,000+ inches of fabric to gather and ruffle, I brought in the big guns of my ruffler foot. I actually had not used this for a project yet and was slightly scared of it, and I actually regret it a little bit because this thing is so easy to use. This is just an attachment for my singer. I'm sure most sewing machines have their own ruffler attachment, and I played a lot with the settings off camera, and I ended up on, I think, like max ruffle settings, because I wanted max ruffleage of this, and I was just kind of having a blast, honestly. Again, I feel like I'm faux complaining when I'm talking about like the amount that this takes, but I also want to emphasize the amount it takes because doing projects like this is really hard, and some of it is like the actual like endurance of the volume of things that you're doing. If you were watching closely, you noticed I hadn't attached the sleeves yet, and that's because I wanted to add the ruffle detail to the sleeve before I attached it, which I did off camera. Don't worry, you're going to see how I did it around the hem of the dress and the waist. I just didn't do this part on camera, but here I am easing the sleeve into the sleeve head. I'm making sure there's no actual gathers here. We do have a tiny bit of puckering that I just couldn't get rid of for the life of me, but I wanted no hard gathers because the whole point of this dress, I feel like there's a lot of gathers at the waist and at the hem, and obviously the ruffling, but like the sleeves themselves, I think one of the things that makes them so gorgeous is the fact that it's a clean line and not a gathered piece. So I am definitely going back, unpicking, resewing, unpicking, resewing, all of that good stuff. And then once I felt good about those sleeves, I am going to, of course, serge around the edges. Even though these seams actually won't be visible, but I'll know. And this makes me happy. And I'm still adjusting to having a serger and using my serger, so I'm trying to really get comfortable with it. And now I spend the rest of my life adding the ruffles. Here I am adding the waist ruffles. I'm actually doing my second layer here. I decided one layer of ruffle was not quite doing it for me, so I needed to double up to get the effect that I felt like was had in the movie. So I'm going around a second time with the ruffles, and I am just sewing them down, and then I'm again pulling out all of the stitches that were in there originally because again, I just like don't like willy-nilly thread in my project. And while I was learning to use my ruffling foot, my ruffles are not exactly aligned correctly. So it would have been like painfully obvious visually that I had a bunch of lines of stitching happening with my ruffles. But here I'm going to actually show you the process of me adding the ruffles. So I'm going around the bottom of the skirt where the gathered big ruffle is attached to the skirt, and then I'm putting this ruffle detail around it. So I'm going around first once, sewing on the ruffle, and I'm using, you can't tell, but I'm using that green line of tape that I put down to mark the middle of the ruffle, because again, I just kind of was all over the place when I used my ruffler foot because I was still learning. So my stitching for the ruffle was not exactly down the middle. So here I'm getting it exactly down the middle so it doesn't look zigzaggy and weird on the dress. And then once I've unpicked this extra stitching in that first row of ruffles, I'm now going around with my second row of ruffles. This time, not really using the tape as the guide, but my first round of ruffles as my guide. Thank God this was sheer. I don't know what I would have done for guidance otherwise. And now I am pivoting to the lining, starting by just sewing the shoulder seams and side seams together. I then made sure my armholes and the bottom were pressed in because I knew those would be sewn down. I would tack these in by hand later, which you'll see what I mean by this. So I actually first ran a basting stitch to where that stitching line will be, so that way I could cut into the fabric to make sure it pressed really neatly. Because again, I'm trying to just enclose everything to help with sensory issues. Comic Cons can already be sensory overload for me. I don't need any rogue pieces of fabric touching me. And even though it's excessive, I am understitching after I attach this just by the neckline. The neckline is the only place I'm attaching this by machine. But yeah, I just felt like it needed an understitch because I can't help myself. I love an understitch. And then because I'm extra excessive after the understitch, I'm then top stitching. Mainly because I realized I shouldn't have even understitched this to start with, because I'm actually going to cover this with another ruffle. So a line of stitching that was a top stitching was fine. I didn't need the invisibility of understitching. And I am going to spend the rest of my evening hand tacking the lining down along the arm seams and around the zipper. Again, this just makes sure that there's no raw edges of anything touching me, even though I nicely serged everything. It's always nice to have less sensory ick. And my camera did a great job focusing on my shoulder instead of my sewing machine, but I am just using the same method I've been using to add the neck ruffle here. And last but not least is figuring out the, I don't want to say necktie, but like the thing in the front detail that kind of looks like a necktie, but floatier. So I'm just working on getting my lines draping it. I'm just draping it kind of wild, willy-nilly onto the actual dress. In between each draping try, I'm then cutting it on my cutting board using an actual ruler to get like all the angles and stuff to hopefully be looking correct. And I'm just going back and forth between this and my dress over and over again. And I would have normally left this raw, like if I wasn't trying to mimic something from a movie, but on the movie I can tell that actually it's probably technically a hand rolled hem, but we're going to give it a double turn hem down at the bottom because I can tell that's what was done on the costume, except for again, I think the costume was hand rolled, but I don't enjoy doing that. So we're double turn hemming. It'll get a similar enough effect. And I will say, I personally don't love the like neck hangy thing. So I'm actually making this removable because I do plan on wearing this dress in my everyday life. So I'm adding a hook and eye. So I have a eye that I'm like a really flat eye that I'm sewing under the neck ruffle that hopefully you won't be able to see when I wear it in my normal life. And then I have the little neck thing that I can attach using the hook that I sewed to it to the eye to wear it for when I cosplay. So I'm pretty pleased with that device because I was not loving the necktie look. I think I did a great job with this, and with that, we are all ready for the reveal. I can't wait to show you this project. This has been the hardest project I've done in a minute, and I've learned so much doing it and tried so many new things. So I hope you enjoy it. All right, you've seen the reveal. I hope you enjoyed it. I tried to find the best background possible for it and ended up at Freeway Park in Seattle. I did also work with a photographer, so stay tuned for some really cool pics. And he also shot with like an 80s film camera. So we're gonna see how that turns out. It was his first time really using it. So super excited to share all of that with you. You'll be able to find that on Instagram. Any of the actual footage we shoot using the film camera, like moving film camera, I will post over here on YouTube if I get the chance. But as always, we're gonna go through the usual thing. We're gonna go through cost breakdown, to project plots, and then to hope helps. So starting with the budget, I have my sheet here. All things considered, I didn't think this project was ridiculously expensive considering the yardage I used, and some of that is because I used dance costume fabrics, and that meant they were more polyester and nylon based, which is more affordable than, of course, if I use silk. And I did include, there was a fabric I bought for this project that I can't use because it wasn't what I wanted at all. It's the risk of buying fabric online, something that's very frustrating in the modern day. I didn't even use like $40 of this fabric, but I did buy it and it was for this project even though it failed, so I was going to include it in the cost anyway. But I spent $137.61 on fabric, considering the fact that this took about 11 yards, again including those 4 yards I didn't use. Not super surprising. For notions, this is pretty much just thread and a zipper and a label, so I spent $10.47 on that. And then the pattern itself was really affordable at $13.25. It makes sense. Pacifica Patterns is not like a particularly seeked out pattern company, so that price all makes sense, which brings this costume in at $161.33, which to me, not too shabby at all things considered, because this gown is gorgeous. There was so much work put into it. I think it looks really, really, really nice. I don't mind that I spent this on it at all. I think that's actually a great price for what I got from it. However, I will say hours working on this, of course, took a lot longer. It took me about 3 hours to just get the mock-up figured out and everything patterned. And then it was an additional hour to cut out my actual fabric. The sewing took 17 hours and 15 minutes, and I sewed for 1 hour and 30 minutes, which brings me to a time total of 22 hours and 45 minutes. This dress took a long time. It was mostly over one weekend, and then I finished it up in short chunks after work throughout the week. So not too bad there. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised this didn't take longer, and this makes me, I don't know, just definitely have some ideas for moving forward with cosplay and stuff like that. And then as always here on this channel, we talk about a living wage. My definition of a living wage is not just accepting and existing the bare minimum. Not only if you are making a living wage should you be able to afford food, a roof over your head, transportation, healthcare, all of that stuff. I also think you should be able to spend some on hobbies as well as save for your future or emergencies. So I went through my last video a bunch of different definitions of living wage, and you guys on the poll answered to average between the MIT and the quote-unquote comfortable wage statistics I found, which comes out to $51 an hour here in Seattle. Keep in mind, Seattle is one of the most top 10 expensive cities in the US, so if you wanted to pay your workers a living wage, you likely would not start a factory sewing in Seattle because it would be significantly more expensive here than you would find in other parts of the nation. So if you multiply the 22 hours and 45 minutes by $51, you get $1,160.25 for labor costs. This is what I would have to do to pay myself a living wage for sewing this, which brings me to a grand total of $1,321.58 to make this garment. And of course, if you are a business, you want to have profit. You don't just want the bare minimum. So I always say this is not a one-to-one for factory sewing. It is more like if you were to commission a seamstress for something like this. And there's a lot of seamstresses that are really, really underpaying themselves for their work. So of course you would find this cheaper. I just want to use these numbers to get us all thinking about what a living wage means and what it means when we buy something like clothing so cheaply, considering the fact that sewing cannot be done without human hands and human labor. That said, we're wrapping it up on budget. And I have the dress here, freshly washed even, and washed really well, as you can see. I mean, it's all polyester, so I would be kind of pissed if it didn't. I am super, super pleased with this. I realized I didn't clip the little tie back on. That was one thing that I wanted to highlight is I have made this so that way I can wear it without the little ruff thing here. I just personally don't love that for everyday wear. I think, of course, it fits for the cosplay, but as I have talked about on this channel, I've been really struggling with the idea of doing cosplaying while also trying to be environmentally responsible. I don't know a single cosplayer who doesn't rewear their cosplays, so that's not that much of a worry. I know if I make something, I'll wear it for years to come, but I did really want, because I love this dress and I think it's so beautiful, I wanted to be able to wear it to work or on a date or to get drinks or like wherever. Obviously, if I wore it to work, I would be wearing a slip so it doesn't have that nude illusion going on because that would be a bit risque for work. However, I think it would work for work, right? I might actually get a "wow, you're really fancy today" comment for work. I love this, and this is not gonna all of a sudden become a cosplay channel. I really enjoy cosplaying. I think it's fun. The biggest thing that I love is this made me push my skills so much. I tried pattern drafting stuff that I've never done before. I tried altering a pattern in a lot more drastic of a way than I have before. Previously, I've mostly, you know, adjusted patterns to get like more room in the bicep or just kind of fit things for the way I want them. Zipper up the back, you know, all of that good stuff. And this one went so far beyond that with getting these sleeves together, which are quite lovely, and I'm sure I'm gonna use this sleeve pattern again because it's so pretty. It also made me finally get out. I've owned my ruffler foot for, how many years would I say now? 2? I think I've had my ruffler foot for 2 years, and I have just never really had the occasion or need to get it out, but I knew I had to make so many ruffles for this project that I had to get it out. This was my first time experimenting with kind of the stitching and serging techniques, and also layering and really thinking about garment flow. That was one of the biggest things I found while making this costume, is to me, the point of the costume in the movie is how much it flows and how it moves. And if I was to choose something a bit more organza or a bit more stiff, I feel like I couldn't get that movement that this costume really calls for. So this like definitely tested like my sourcing skills. I don't know, I feel like this really up-leveled a lot of skills for me, and for me that is, I think, one of the most appealing things about continuing to try some cosplaying here and there, just because I felt like I was able to stretch and push myself in such a bigger way than I usually do. I definitely think you'll be seeing more of this type of video. I did find this really enjoyable, and I definitely am thinking about maybe for Halloween making another cosplay piece. It's really so nice, and I think this is a project that I made that I'm most proud of recently because I learned, I don't feel like I've learned so much, and I feel like it's incredibly well made. And yeah, I'm incredibly happy with this piece. And yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say other than I love it, and I feel so pretty in it. And also, this was my first time collaborating with a photographer. I actually take all of my photos and videos myself, so that was a very different feeling, and it was really fun because I obviously have an eye for the way light hits and all of that, so we actually traded ideas back and forth quite a bit, and I definitely also pushed myself in kind of like the reveal and some of the images, and he really helped push me in some of that. I've across the board found this to be a phenomenal project for my growth as a sewist and as a photographer and just as a creative. I haven't gotten to bounce many ideas off of creatives, and both in making this cosplay and in filming and doing the reveal and photography for this cosplay, I feel like I just was in dialogue with a lot of creatives. I mean, of course, I was not talking to the costume director of the film, but you're still in dialogue with the film when you make something. I got to like really bring out some of my researching skills, some of my detail-oriented copying skills. I often talk about in art school, a good part of my degree to start was learning to copy things really well, specifically with like watercolor or gouache or stuff like that. Copying is a huge way you learn. So I anticipate myself just wanting to cosplay more and more because, again, copying just really pushes you to learn. Spooky. We love to learn on this channel. Yeah, you're about to hop in my lap, but I'm about to get up. And with that, I am now going to jump into the last segment, Hope Helps. Typically, this is the week I talk news stuff, but right now I don't have the time, quite frankly, to do the research I usually have to do for these segments to have them be news related. So instead, I'm just going to, like usual, be talking about my own experiences with community and the things that keep me hopeful. And I feel like I have quite a lot this video. I've been a busy bee since I filmed reveal even actually and in the making. So in those weeks I have had Sew Expo, I have had Comic Con, and then of course I've been busy here up on YouTube as well. And I just wanted to highlight the things about each community that are giving me hope. Sew Expo. I feel like I often kind of talk down on Sew Expo. However, this year I didn't take any classes and I think that helped. And I got to catch up with actually a subscriber. We did kind of the shopping rounds together. And then I also got to talk to all the shop owners that I usually talk to at Sew Expo. And it just was nice to feel familiar in a space that's not always felt the most comfortable for me. It was also nice to see, I think Sew Expo must have done a better job on community outreach, because I definitely saw new booths by people part of our local Seattle sewing community. So Wildwood came this year, and Wildwood Creative, they're in Renton here. If you haven't checked them out, I highly recommend it. I really appreciate her ethos around her business. I only really got to I don't think she knows who I am at all, but I gave a quick wave and moved on my day. But I was very excited to see them there, and I hope they were really successful there. Also, a new one that I saw was Ballard Millinery. That word is not coming out right today. It's just not going to be right today. I had walked by and meant to take a workshop there before, so it was really nice to talk with the founders of it, and they had some really amazing buttons for sale, and apparently we're getting more buttons in from England. So some really, really cool collections there. And it was just nice to connect with them. And I feel like I just chatted with a lot of really lovely people. And I also felt a little bit differently because I kind of dawned on me finally that this event is run by the community. It seems like it's a lot of volunteer run. So of course it's not going to be perfect, but so many of our community spaces like ECCC, which is Comic-Con here, are owned by these big corporate conglomerates. So there is inevitably something just kind of special about being able to be in a space that is truly run for and by the community. And again, I think they did a better job this year about community outreach. And it was really cool to see a lot of new vendors there. Although I gotta real quick take this moment to shade Mood a little bit. So Mood came and I was super excited. I knew Mood was coming. That was one of the reasons I made the trek down there. And I was so disappointed when I pulled up and all they had was swatch cards. And they were swatches that were like this big by this big. I get that we have nothing here in Seattle, or not nothing, but very few garment-focused fabric places. However, I was mad because when I pictured Mood coming here, for me, if you're gonna be a vendor at Sew Expo, I better be walking away with the fabric in hand. I thought that they could have instead really brought up a truck of dead stock material to sell. So you could actually leave with a yardage, and the dead stock material that they get, they don't always list on their site because there's not enough yardage to make listing on their site worth it. I just had such high hopes for Mood coming in, and I felt like Mood was really there to capitalize as opposed to build. Even the fact that their cards, to order fabric, you had to literally go through their website. To even see the prices, you had to go through their website. The whole thing for me felt yucky. I hope other people enjoyed how Mood came, but I just felt like the way that Mood showed up was really disappointing for me, and I had higher expectations. But this is supposed to be a Hope Help segment, so we're gonna move on from that, but I just did have to call out Mood. So talking about Comic-Con and where community sits, I just really had a great time at Comic-Con. I had a great time seeing friends that I see once a year. I had a good time seeing everyone's costumes, and everything just felt pretty warm and community oriented. I also learned a lot and talked to a lot of new people, and I also really appreciated the organization around the cosplayers there had around wearing anti-ice statements. I thought it was really, really cool, and I really appreciate the proactivism of the Comic-Con community or the costuming community on that. Very different from Sew Expo. It's nice to be in a space that doesn't feel apolitical, because I will still say Sew Expo doesn't feel great from a politics standpoint. And I was actually also able to connect with some of the people from the sewing community who have, I would say, a little bit more say in Sew Expo, and give them my thoughts and feelings as a young person and how inaccessible Sew Expo was, and just have a really, really great dialogue about it. So with all of that, I just felt like Comic-Con and Sew Expo were just really nice places to show up and be myself. Again, even if I'm a little bit overwhelmed and there's always frustrations, I say this all the time, community is not about convenience, community is not about things being easy, and community is often frustrating, because when you are in spaces with groups of people, you will annoy each other, and that is the way that community works. Because as I mentioned in a kind of more recent video, being community members is not the same as being friends. Friends and community, you can be friends in community, but you also have to have community that you are not necessarily friends with. I just felt like I just saw good examples of a lot of things happening at both of these. And last, I wanted to just talk about how much you guys make me feel hopeful, and how much YouTube makes me feel hopeful, and kind of has changed my mind about something recently. So I expected the dialogue around living wage on my last video that I talked about a living wage to not go very well. I expected people to be kind of rude. I expected to have to block people. And I really appreciated a lot of you guys shared your own experiences with a living wage. I thought everyone's dialogue was really, really thoughtful. I thought everybody was very kind, and there were like definitely like disagreements, but it wasn't in a non-civil way. And I thought that we had reached a point that the internet could no longer be a place of like civil dialogue. And I just want to say y'all proved me wrong on that. And I really appreciate that. That gives me so much hope. It gives me hope that you really can create spaces that are intentional. And I mean, I would not probably say my channel is safe because I do block people regularly. But like, it's good to know that I feel like I've built a community of relatively safe people, because in the past few years, I've really stepped back and been incredibly intentional about how I've grown my YouTube. And it feels like all that work on making sure this feels like a little bit of a safer place for dialogue has really paid off. Huge kudos to all of y'all for being so respectful and so thoughtful. And I just feel very honored to have such an amazing group of people engaging with my videos. There were definitely like things that I disagreed with, which I guess I should say, sorry if I'm blunt. I have been told that I'm a very blunt writer. I didn't take offense to anything, and I would not intend to be rude to anybody, but yes, I have been told I can be a blunt writer. That is the tism acting up, but I do just want to say I appreciated every single person who commented very thoughtfully on that video and that poll, and it just like kind of gave me some hope in the internet again. And it made me really reflect on everything this channel means to me. I know all of you who watch my sewing videos don't necessarily watch my just chatty videos, but in my chatty videos, I had talked about how about a year ago, I was ready to quit my channel before I really pulled it in this kind of different direction. And I just feel like that video that I put out, it'll now be 2 weeks from when you see this video, but it's just a week ago from where I am in time. It just made me so glad I didn't quit and give it up, because I already have so many experiences I would have missed out on. I feel really grateful for this community. And this community gives me hope because, again, it proves, to me, this community proves that there is good stuff happening on the internet. I don't even know how to put in words how appreciative I am for how civil and wonderful everybody is. Again, I feel like I'm just saying the same thing again, but I'm really, really, truly, genuinely grateful for this community. Thank you all for showing up and for talking through nuanced things and being vulnerable. And I just thought the whole thing was really amazing. So these were kind of more loosey-goosey hope things, but where I'm gonna leave us with this hope helps is take a chance, take a risk. That's something that the last video I posted had me reflecting on, but also Comment Con and Sew Expo, which are two spaces I would have never entered had I not had a YouTube. I was just thinking about how community takes so much risk and so much putting yourself out there and so many like really genuinely scary things. My coping tip or my encouragement to you is take the risk. There's so many reasons to take the risks, and yes, sometimes things will be hard, sometimes things will hurt, sometimes things won't feel good, and sometimes it's just going to take you time to really find that right space. I can probably at some point talk more about my journey with community, but in my early 20s, I started out in kind of a different creative community, and I found it to be really, really unfulfilling and sucky. Now that I have found community that is a lot more intentional and accountable and thoughtful, I can really see why that community was not it. I took a risk when I started this channel. I took a risk when I started showing up to big events and big crowds. That's never been my thing. That's never been something I'm particularly comfortable with. And I would encourage you to take risks to build your community and to build your network, because let's be honest, we're in an environment where we need to be taking more risks to make the world the place we want to live in. That is my final piece of advice. Go do a risky thing to make some community and meet some folks. Put yourself out there, and if you fail, I promise you'll still learn something. Ultimately, a good community is a community you can fail and you can be wrong in while also being held accountable. But also, like, you're gonna find things that aren't the right fit. You're gonna find quote unquote communities that aren't actual communities and that are all about feeling good or getting something or consumerism or something. You have to try, and if you don't try and you don't risk things, you're not gonna end up where you want. And that I know, really sucks to hear when you're someone with an anxiety disorder. I hated to hear it too. Life is really hard to progress and move forward without risk. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you enjoyed something a little different from me. I know I felt so much growth and stretching, and this video just is definitely one of my favorites ever. Not because I think the video itself is great, but because of, I don't know, the way I grew as this video. So, and let me tell you, this growth was not comfortable. I definitely learned, and I definitely was not perfect. But yes, with that, I am going to be off next week, and then I will be back the week after, actually bringing you another big sewing project. After this, things settle down a little bit for me, but we do have Easter egg strut coming up, which means I've got to get my gorgeous 1930s gown on. So expect that in 2 weeks. Take care of yourself in the meantime. Go outside, lots of big breaths, move your body, snuggle a cat. And then as always, you can support my channel by either buying me a coffee over on Ko-fi for one time, or you can subscribe on my Patreon as a monthly member. As you see by my cost breakdowns, it is quite expensive for me to run this channel. And while I am so grateful to have the privilege of the finances to run this channel, I am also so grateful anytime anyone feels called to pay me as an artist. And then as always, thumbs up, comment down below. Help support me. Tell me if there's any costumes you think it would be really cool to see me do. And what are we doing last? Spooky. And of course, if you are still here, definitely subscribe and stick around. If you've made it through this long of a video, I would say you like me. So I will see you, like I said, in 2 weeks, back with a gown. Bye!